If members could be bringing themselves to order, as contrary to that clock up there, it is actually more or less 6 o'clock. Just wait for the clerk to come back. Sorry, turned itself off again. It has a habit of doing that. Right. We will be shortly turning our attention to the agenda for this evening, but as this is the first proper meeting of the Council or any of its committees since the tragic events that occurred in Manchester recently, I would ask all of you to be upstanding for a minute's silence. A couple of minor housekeeping points first of all. There is no fire drill scheduled for this evening, but if the extreme temperatures do cause an explosion or a short circuit in the wiring, we will follow the Democratic Services officer out of the building once she's established a safe route to depart from. Now, may I ask if any member of the public, or indeed any officer or councillor, is intending to record or either orally or visually the proceedings this evening? That is not to stop anyone doing it, it's just so that we know. Okay, that's just our standard webcasting service then. Right, on with the items on the agenda. Sorry, Councillor Powell.
Apologies, Mr. Chair.
It's all right. The traffic in Maidstone, we know when you have to come any distance that there's always likely to be an issue. Item 1, apologies for absence. No, I think we're all here, so no notification of substitute members. Item 3, notification of visiting members. Councillor Atkinson first. What item are you here for? Thank you. And Councillor Daly. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Items were drawn. We are aware that Councillor Perry is on his way. Councillor Harper, you're sitting at the back there. You should be over there. Thank you. Councillor Butler, if you're are you intending to speak? Okay, thank you very much. Just please note for information of visiting members, if you are visiting and intending to speak, as opposed to Councillor Butler, you are supposed to sit over here so we can actually see you. Thank you very much. Item 4, items withdrawn from the agenda. No items withdrawn this evening. Item 5, date of adjourned meeting there will be an adjourned meeting. The length of the agenda means that certain items on this agenda will be carried over to that meeting, and I will ask Mr Bailey to explain which ones those are.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. On members, you'll have the running order of the application and speakers tonight, and on those items you'll see items 21, 25, 26 and 27 to be rolled over to the next meeting on the 1st of June. All those interested parties have been notified of this, and as the Chairman has already indicated, that's due to the length of the agenda tonight. There's quite a number of items that are quite contentious on the item, so that decision was made early to avoid those individuals waiting in the public gallery. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr Bailey. Item 6, any business the Chairman regards as urgent, including the urgent update report as it relates to matters to be considered at this meeting. Is it agreed, members, that we take the urgent items? Sorry, I can't hear that. Thank you very much, members.
Just explain one thing on the reason of the length.
Do you need to now?
Just very quickly.
So Mr Bailey needs to say something.
Just very quickly, I know members have previously raised issues about the size of the urgent item agenda. Substantial reason for that is because obviously you're aware of the IT attacks that came when this was needing to be produced. Our systems, GIS systems, are linked to the internet, therefore we couldn't produce the red line maps at the same time, so hence they're on this item now. That's the reasons why there's a slightly large agenda pack.
Thank you very much for that very useful explanation. Item 7, disclosures by members and officers. Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Chairman. I took advice from our legal officer earlier on this afternoon regarding agenda items 23 and 24, only to say that in relation to my new position as Deputy Cabinet Member in charge of education at Kent County Council, but I have had no discussion on this matter, so I intend to speak and vote this evening. Thank you.
And of course they're not Kent County Education Authority schools. So
but Kent still do the planning. Thank you.
Just to put that on the record so people understand that. Okay. Did I see another indication? I thought I saw someone else. Councillor Mumford, yes, thank you.
It would be item 19, the one that's in Bolton and Chelsea. Chairman of the Parish Council Subcommittee run the planning. I do not get involved, and therefore I am just making you aware of that. I do intend to speak and vote.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mumford. That's very helpful. We will take disclosures of lobbying at the appropriate agenda items, as there are so many of them. Councillor Powell.
Sorry, sir. Agenda item 13/1823, Mayfield Nursery, Harwich. I do sit on the Harwich Parish Council, but this all happened well before I got involved with the Parish Council, so I will be taking part tonight.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Councillor Powell. As I say, we take declarations of lobbying at the time of the application, as there are so many. Item 9, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I'm not aware of any this evening. No, so everything will be in public. Item 10, minutes of the meeting of the 27th of April 2017. Councillor Prendergast.
Chairman, I apologise if I've missed something, but I don't believe that the minutes are representative of what happened on the 27th of April. I can see that your dissent to the named vote is recorded, as is another councillor's dissent on the proceedings, but my request for a written response from the Leader of the Council and the Chief Executive on the manner in which certain papers were presented has not been recorded. And I think it's important that it should be, and that I should receive the response that I asked for. Thank you.
That point is duly noted, and the request will be dealt with appropriately. It might be pre-seed, but a reference will be made to it in the minute. Right. Other than that note, are the minutes agreed as circulated? Thank you very much, members. We now move to the minutes of the short meeting of the 23rd of May, which have been tabled this evening. I don't think there will be any dispute just due to the shortness of these minutes. Are those agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you. Right, come to item 12, appointment of political group spokespersons. We'll start with the Conservative group. Councillor Round. Liberal Democrat group, Councillor Harwood. Independent group, I assume it'll be you, Councillor Mumford. And similarly for UKIP, Councillor Powell. Sorry?
I was actually going to nominate another member of the club.
Oh, sorry, apologies.
Rather than
Councillor.
myself.
And that would
And be Councillor Borton.
Councillor Borden, just to check, is that fine with you? Yeah, just checking. Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Round. Right, item 13, presentation of petitions, if any. Do we have any? Right, there is no petition actually being spoken to tonight, although one might be referred to in passing. Did members hear that? Right, thank you. Right, we now move on to item 14 on page 14, report of the Head of Planning and Development, deferred item. Mr Bailey.
Yes, with regard to the current item, it is still in negotiation with one of our principal planning officers. That will come back to committee as and when the report is ready. There's quite a lot of issues that members asked us to consider in terms of air quality issues and in terms of the design of the building, so that will take a bit of time to resolve and then be brought back to members. Thank you.
Yes, it's understandable given the redesign that's having to be done to a certain extent, but it is commendable to see that the developer was very much open to that redesign. So it is a very productive process, and I wouldn't want people to think that it's not coming back is a bad thing. Right, we now move to the schedule of planning applications set out for this evening, which has just escaped me. I'm going to need to borrow. Unfortunately, right, we're starting with what I hope will be relatively simple start items. We're starting with application number 28 on page 298. This is an application at Maidstone Museum that's in Faith Street. Are there any members wishing to speak on this application? No, in that case, can we move to the vote? I'll move the recommendation from the Chair. Councillor Harwood, you were second in there, I believe. We now move on to item 29, which... Sorry, I'm getting enthusiastic. All those in favour? My enthusiasm runneth away with me there. That's unanimous. Sorry, as I was saying, item 29 on page 301. Again, same situation. Does any member wish to speak on this application? No, in that case, do I see a proposer for the recommendation? Councillor Powell, you were first, Councillor Cox seconding. All those in favour? That's everyone. And the third and final application on this, number 30 on page 304, Maidstone Museums in Faith Street. Again, anyone wishing to speak on this? No. I've moved the recommendation. Is that seconded? Councillor Clark. All those in favour? Thank you very much, members. If only everything this evening would be so easy. I fear that... I fear that we have now rapidly reached the end of the quick and simple part of the meeting. We now move on to application 23 on page 224, which is the first application on a Jubilee Free School, Gatland House, Gatland Lane, and I'll call on the officer to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. This is a site, Jubilee Free School in Gatland Lane. Just to give you a brief background, it was approved in 2015 with a condition restricting pupil numbers and to a one-form entry. this application relates to an extension to that building and is linked with item agenda 24, which is a removal of the restrictive condition on pupils. But we take this part of this application first, and I'll run through that. Essentially, it's an extension to the rear of the building to create more floor space to enable the school to become a two-form entry primary school. You can see the existing site there, which are building to the front of the site, and a grassed area and a hard tarmacked area to the rear. The playing fields lie to this side of the site, and Biogrove School lies to the north, and housing to the east. You can see the boundary screening with the residential properties and the front of the building here. Another street scene photo looking down Gatlin Lane. Sort of, again, they're probably similar. And then you can see the tree boundaries with the playing fields there in the background. And again, you can see the road markings in front of the school to prevent parking. That's the view along Gatlin Lane with the entrance to the playing field car park. And that's looking back from the playing fields towards the school with the tree line in front. Those trees in the foreground are on the playing field site. And that's the playing fields. So we move on to that's the existing elevations. And again, and that's the floor plan, which is basically set out classrooms at ground floor and offices and ancillary facilities at first floor. And essentially that's the proposed extension to the rear of the site with the parking layout to the east of the site with play areas within the central part of the site. You can see them here. There's 3 separate play areas with a multi-use games area to the north of the site. The extension amounts to 967 square metres and essentially provides the floor space to create a two-form entry, obviously two classrooms per year, library. There'll be a main hall within the ground floor of the building, extra classrooms at first floor, and library and other sort of ancillary facilities. That's essentially the layout of the development, and essentially the main issues facing the application. Obviously, the 2015 application was restricted to pupil numbers, mainly on the basis of there wasn't a certainty over how the additional pupils would be accommodated on the site, and also concerns over outside open space and access to this. Obviously, this application seeks to provide that extra floor space and exceeds the floor space standards for two-form entry schools as set out in the government guidance. You can see the elevations there, which show the section of the building and the classrooms, and down main hall, which extends to the sort of double height space. So essentially, apart from the floor space, the other issue was outdoor open space, which was the applicant had set out in the report, and they've accepted that in 2 of the categories of outdoor space it fails, but in terms of the priority for outdoor space for schools, it does meet the space, the type of space that is given priority. And in terms of the government guidance, it does say there should be some flexibility taken in respect of outdoor open space, just due to, because most schools have got some sort of constraints, and it's felt, officers feel the agreement with the school to the north offers opportunity for access to that open space. That is secured through an agreement with the school to the north, which allows dual use of both facilities for both schools. And obviously there's the playing fields to the west, which Maidstone Parks and Leisure Department have confirmed there is the opportunity to block book playing fields for use with the school. the school have confirmed, as you'll see in the update, that they have budgeted for booking of those fields. So essentially, in a nutshell, the school have on-site open space for the highest priority in excess of standards, and it's got access to the other types of open space within close proximity of the site, and these can be secured through an agreement. And in terms of the school, it was already agreed and signed up. And sort of against that backdrop, it meets the standards. It shows how it could accommodate the extra pupils, and obviously there's a significant need for school places in the Maidstone West area, and generally you'll see in the report the deficit in places, and KCC Education have confirmed there's a massive need for school places, and there have been some delays to the proposed schools in the area, so there is a potential that there could be a real problem with school places coming into the latter parts of this decade. So essentially, in terms of other issues, highways have been consulted. They do not consider to have a significant impact, and from a noise perspective, the environmental health officer is satisfied, subject to the right condition, that there wouldn't be any significant harm caused. So on the basis of need, the fact the floor spaces are in accordance and there is access to suitable outdoor space, officers recommend an approval subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Right. Now I'm going to ask the legal officer to give a short introduction as how the public speaking section of the meeting will work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a short announcement for members of the public, and in particular those who are speaking on an item on this evening's agenda. As you've just heard, the item is announced by the Chairman, and then the Planning Officer introduces the item. The Chairman will then call the speakers. When you hear your name called, please could you come forward to the table in front of you and take a seat. To speak, press the middle button. You do not need to hold it down. The button will turn green, and the ring around the mouthpiece on the microphone will turn red. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll see your time counting down on the screen in the corner to my right-hand side. At the end of your 3 minutes, the Chairman will tell you when your time is up. Once you've finished speaking, please press the middle button again. It will turn white and return to your seat. Now, you may hear some of the speakers referred to this evening as visiting members. They are members of the Council, but they do not sit on this committee. They also have 3 minutes to speak, but they have no right to vote on any of the applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, our first speaker this evening is Mr. Skinner of the Safe Ant Farm Group. If you'd like to come forward, Mr. Skinner, you have 3 minutes.
Right. In the committee report 2015, it states it has been discussed in detail with the applicants that officers do not consider the site capable of accommodating pupils in excess of 240. Quite straightforward, unambiguous and correct. But to get around this, the applicants plan to use Gatland Park for recreational use, thus conceding the existing site is not big enough to provide safe and secure education for all. This is astonishing. The prospect of infant children running around sharing the same space as the public is frightening. The implications and possibilities are infinite. This has not been thought through, how this will work, how the public will be banned at playtime and sports day. You will be opening a huge can of worms. We believe the agreement with Bower Grove to share facilities is impractical. An increasing use of Gatland Park will inevitably occur. You will be back here sometime debating the overseeing of Gatland Park by the school, thus depriving local residents of its use. It's inevitable. 420 infants have to play somewhere. We as residents would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone when it is said, what do you expect when you live near a school? Why are you always complaining? We did not choose to live near a school. It has been imposed on us, and we have every right to voice our objections. Jubilee have proved to be the most ungracious neighbours. Their actions and attitude do not endear them to the local community. To expand on this statement, the original determination to grant had many conditions attached. Most of the conditions were late in their implementation. We know, we live here. These are your rules and conditions emanating from this chamber that are being openly ignored by these people. How ironic, I see these rules and conditions are in the proposal for an enlarged school. You couldn't make it up. Condition number 4, the last sentence of which states the travel plan shall be implemented in strict accordance with details. Fact. Not implemented, ignored by Jubilee. Apparently the school cannot afford the staff to operate this. Condition 10, a school crossing patrol shall be employed prior to next year's intake. Fact. Not implemented. These are your rules, not ours, openly debated in this chamber, ignored by Jubilee Free School. Members of the committee, there are many, many good reasons to reject this application. We understand the pressure put on you by school places, EFA, Jubilee, etc., but there is a right place and a wrong place for a school. It is easy. Just say no. You already have once. If they don't agree, which I'm sure they will not, let the planning inspector look at it. In our view, a safe ant farm, only the inspector will give a full, unbiased and neutral view of all aspects to this application, unravelling the myths from reality. It is so important to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good timing, Mr. Skinner. Right, Mr. Fitzgerald for the applicant, please.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Brian Fitzgerald and I'm privileged to be the Chair of Trustees at Jubilee Primary School. I'm pleased to speak tonight and set out a number of reasons why members of the committee should agree with the officer's recommendation and approve the 2 applications before you. Jubilee Primary School has been open for 3 years, mainly with a single form of entry, and can be considered a good school which offers every child an outstanding education. It meets the recognised standards for expansion, and a substantial level of work has been completed to justify the operation of a 2-form entry school on this site. It has always been the objective of the proposers and the Department for Education that the school would have 2 forms of entry. The proposed extension provides the necessary facilities on site for it to do so. It meets, and in some respects exceeds, the standards of the government's building bulletin for schools, including the provision of playground areas. Some sports facilities will be provided off-site during school hours at the council-owned recreation ground, in addition to shared facilities with Bower Grove School. Jubilee Primary School is a popular school, it's a happy school, and it enjoys strong support from much of the community. Every year we have been oversubscribed, with parents expressing a preference for the school. Ofsted's Parent View, which is their online forum, shows that 100% of parents would recommend the school to other families. The need for additional pupil places in West Maidstone is officially acknowledged, especially the need for more places in good and outstanding schools. Published data identify significant pressure on Year R to Year 2 places in Maidstone, largely due to inward migration from London and the restriction put on places at Jubilee Primary School. The available data forecasts that these substantial pupil places at Jubilee Primary School, the substantial pupil pressures will increase over time. Expansion of our facilities to allow an increased reception year intake of 60 is central to the provision of pupil places in West Maidstone and the town centre. The applications before you meet the requirements of national planning policy and Maidstone's development plan. The team has worked proactively with statutory consultees, including highways officers, and this has ensured that the applications are sustainable in transport terms. In terms of highway capacity, this is a matter that the inspector at the Fant Farm inquiry also considered and agreed with. I hope that the points I've made are useful as you consider the planning applications before you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Harper, you're next.
As Ward Councillor for Fant, I wish the committee to reject this proposal. I'll concentrate my comments on the lack of outdoor space. Paragraph 8.22, page 232, demonstrates a massive lack of outdoor space. How is this to be addressed? Well, Bowergrove Special School. They're going to be asked to give up most of their site for most of the time or visit the Jubilee School. Currently, they do it with only 120 pupils at Jubilee, but 420 pupils at Jubilee is unlikely to work. So what's the fallback now? Oh yes, Gatland Park. How convenient. Gatland Park is a local community park intensively used by the community for recreation and leisure, including dog walking. There's been no attempts by the council officers to have any consultation with either ward councillors or the local community about the future of their loved park. As councillors here, most of you will remember, you voted for it, a motion at full council in April 2015, just over 2 years ago, and I remind you what you all voted for, that this council resolves to continue to demonstrate its long-term support to maintain Gatland Park as a well-used public open space and not to support any proposals in the future which would reduce the ability of the local community to continue to have free access to the park during normal opening hours, except for occasional community events. It's interesting there's no reference to that policy of the council. It seems to have been totally ignored by our officers. Are there any other examples where a school and a community shares a space, open space? Well, there was until very recently at Oakwood Park, half a mile from here. However, Kent County Council, after 60 years, decided that wasn't sustainable. It said that for 11 to 18-year-olds, that you had to fence them in and you could not allow them to use sites where the public had access at the same time. If you can't do it for 11 to 18-year-olds, how can you do it for 4 to 11-year-olds? Children who are most vulnerable and require more supervision and safeguarding. How would it be acceptable for the education authorities to allow sports in an open public park where people can walk their dogs, can do what they like during the time because you can't fence it off? There's total inconsistency here. If the education experts tell us you have to close off sites to the public for educational usage, that's one thing. However, here they're saying the opposite. Both places cannot be true. I consider that those grounds are sufficient to either reject this application or at least seek a deferral. As yesterday I received legal advice from KCC about the incompatibility of public and school access to the same space.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. Move on to the next ward councillor, Councillor Atkinson, please.
Thank you, Chairman and members. As the report says, this school opened without the benefit of planning permission. This was achieved well over a year later. Page 4 of the school's travel plan states that their ethos is to follow the golden rule, love your neighbour as yourself. Well, I can only say that Jubilee School does not appear to be heeding its own philosophy. I'm sure Councillor Bolton well remembers we both attended a meeting with some of the trustees of the school in July 2016, which was allegedly intended by the school as a bridge-building exercise with the local community. At no time during this meeting did they give any indication that they planned to put in planning applications to increase the footprint of the building by 50% and double the number of pupils. 3 weeks later, they put in planning applications to increase the footprint of the building by 50% and double the number of pupils. Good neighbours? I don't think so. I'd also like to remind members that when Gatland House was first used in the 1980s, a condition was imposed preventing the building being converted into a school. This is unusual for a D1 category building, but it was clearly applied in recognition of the volume of traffic in Gatland Lane. 30 years on, the volume of traffic has increased considerably. The planners back then knew what they were doing, and I hope the current members of the Planning Committee will keep this in mind when coming to their decision. I'll now pick out a few points from the report. Para 1.2 refers to the boundary of well-established conifer trees. Unfortunately, this application involves the felling of this 10-metre high screening. Paras 2.2 and 8.23 state that there's a formal agreement with Bow Grove School to use their facilities. However, if you read this document, it's clearly stated that this arrangement should not be construed as constituting a binding agreement between us. Furthermore, this is stated as long ago as 17th of December 2014 and was signed by the previous head teacher at Bow Grove. I wonder if the present head teacher is aware of this arrangement. Paragraph 5.1 says the site notice was placed on the 4th of October 2016. Unlike most site notices, which seem to be in place for months, even years after expiry, this was quickly removed. I wonder who did this. Paragraph 5.3, a letter of support says the school has stopped Gatlin Lane being used as a rat run and cars do not obstruct traffic. I don't know what grounds have to make these claims. It is still used as a rat run, and as a neighbour who lives immediately around the corner from this school, I have myself witnessed larger vehicles having to drive all along the footpath in order to get through. Paragraph 8.11, need. As I understand it, Jubilee School is not currently able to fill all its places. The report says there are deficits of a mere 4 and 10 places from 2017 to 8 and 2019 to 20. The new school plan for Hermitage Lane will surely remove the need for any expansion to Jubilee School. Paragraph 8.24, Paul Harper has mentioned it's being closed off, the public park's been closed off the joggers, so I won't expand on that. Para 8.26.
I'm sorry, Councillor Atkinson, you won't be expanding any further.
No,
I have to bring you
okay.
to an end at that point, sorry.
Thanks.
Councillor Daly.
Chairman, I have to ask, what is it that caused the original limitation 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, on this site? The reason was that the site was too small. A mere postage stamp, I think it was called at the time. It was deemed to be a wrong building in the wrong place for the wrong purpose. And I'd like to know what is so different today from those conditions of 2 or 3 years ago. And the answer is, as far as I can see, not much. Yes, there's been a successful school run with the one form entry, and according to Mr. Fitzgerald, it's running very well. They want to increase it to double the size, but in fact, in increasing it to double the size, all the problems which have been associated with this site come into play. The parking, the movement of people and cars and buses and lorries and all the other things that go with that. The school was supposed to provide a travel plan, and I understand from my colleague, Councillor Bird, that in fact that travel plan has not actually been forthcoming. So I have to ask the question, what is it that's different that would make you change your mind from what you did 2 or 3 years ago? The EFA, in my opinion, probably made a bad mistake, and we're asked to endorse it, and I don't think we should, frankly, endorse it. There are a lot of people in the area who are very upset by this, and their local voices seem to be squashed at every time by the MPPF. But in fact, I have read in the MPPF, I think, a paragraph which possibly helps us tonight to make a decision which is in favour of the school having to stay where it is at the size it is, because paragraph number 77 in the MPPF talks vastly about protecting the green spaces which are valued by the local people for open space provision, that is for games and also for entertainment and all sorts of other things that they value as a locality. Once you start getting exclusivity by use of a school, then you squash the local use, and that is a fact. We know that from other areas. So what I say to you tonight is, please look at this very carefully. We were given an undertaking 3 years ago that the public open space which is a planning designation, would be provided and would be protected on Gatlin Lane. It would not be able to be used by other people exclusively, excluding the local population. And the use of Bowergrove, that might be fine at the moment, but doubling the use of it would actually diminish Bowergrove's opportunity for their special needs children to use that land as they would require. So I'm asking you tonight, please do not endorse the EFA in their folly.
Thank you for your perfect timing there, Councillor Daly, exactly on 3 minutes. Right. I draw members' attention before doing anything else to the fact that we have 2 urgent updates on the agenda this evening, which I do hope members will read. And now, at this point, I will take declarations of lobbying. Might be better to ask who hasn't been lobbied. Declarations of lobbying? Right, Councillor Spooner and Councillor Vizard appear not to have been lobbied. Everyone else has been. Right. Councillor Borton is the remaining ward member. Sorry, Councillor Prince. The air conditioning is very noisy, but we shall try and open a few windows. Thank you. Right, Councillor Borton, you are the remaining ward member who has not yet spoken, so would you like to kick us off?
I would. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I think there's a bit of background in the history of what's happened over the last couple of years that members should be aware of. Obviously, there was the application which has been referred to, and then there was a meeting that Councillor Atkinson and I held with Mr. Fitzgerald and his colleague at the Jubilee School in July last year. And it was a very productive meeting, and the whole purpose of it was about how we work together going forward, bearing in mind that you've got one form entry at the time, and to rebuild relationships with the local community. And Councillor Atkinson and I moved a lot, actually, to try and accommodate the wishes of both the local community and the school on that particular occasion. And then, as Councillor Atkinson referred to, 2 weeks later, a leaflet dropped going, we're going to put in another planning application. And I have to say, I was pretty furious at the time that we had not been told about that by the school, because actually it just made things even worse in the local community. Of course, there's 2 real issues here, from what I can see. There is the particular one on open space, outdoor open space. To answer we need to get an answer to Councillor Daly's question. What has changed? What has improved in the last 3 years? Because the size of the site hasn't. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, and I'd be quite grateful if we could go to Kent Highway straight away on this one, which is that I see no tangible evidence in the report I've read in the urgent updates at all that you have fully assessed the impact of these additional students coming to the school, not just on Gatlin Lane, but on the key junctions nearby, Fountain Crossroads, both ends of Glebe Lane, the traffic lights at Queen's Road, and the top of Fant Lane as well. And just to take this as an example, in 8.36, for example, it says that the transport statement, blah, 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 says there'll be 69 vehicle trips or 138 two-way vehicle movements in the morning and afternoon. Have you taken that from the catchment area that the school operates in now? Where's that? Can we have some more detail on those particular figures, where that comes from, as well? So, bearing in mind the lack of a travel plan as well that never came after the last application, there's a number of overhanging questions here on this particular application, Mr. Chairman, which I think need to be answered. But from my perspective, there is one thing that's crystal clear here as well, and that's on the open space, particularly 8.22, makes it very, very clear about how we are woefully short. And the key thing about using Gatlin Park is that neither I nor Councillor Atkinson or Councillor Harper have ever been asked by the Parks Department about this proposal. So, and because I'm sure we'd have probably turned around and said, this isn't going to work. Gatlin Park would just have a new play area, it's a public space, and it needs to be respected as so. So, I'd quite like answers to all of those questions, because if they're not answered, we can't proceed with this any further.
Right. Before we go on any further, gentlemen, ladies of the committee, we do need to be aware of a few things. It is annoying that in many cases that an applicant doesn't get planning consent before proceeding to open a facility. Retrospective planning applications are annoying. Being a bad neighbour can be annoying. Not complying with conditions is extremely irritating, but at the end of the day, planning applications have to be determined on the planning application, not whether conditions have been complied with. If conditions are not complied with, that's a matter for enforcement under those existing planning applications or for a new application. We should not be taking that into account in determining an application. Now, I'm not suggesting you should, and I'm not directing this at you, Mr. Borton, this is for the whole committee. Similarly, a decision of the council on the operational use of land should not be taken as binding a planning decision. It's a different issue. It might be that it means that the park wouldn't be available or would be available, which is important, but it shouldn't be taken as binding our discretion as a planning committee. I do need to say that because we do need to be aware of what we can and can't do. Now I'm going to bring in the highway officer to address the transport issues, which I think are actually somewhat more straightforward than we might think. But Mr. Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to deal with Councillor Borton's points first. There has been an assessment of impact. There was a transport assessment submitted alongside the planning application, and the County Council's Highway Authority, as it always does, has reviewed that document thoroughly and has commented on it extensively in its consultation responses to the Borough Council. Within that transport assessment, there are forecasts of the number of traffic movements that will be generated by the extension to the school. The applicant has based those on their anticipated pupil catchment area, and they have made reference to postcode data associated with existing pupils, so home postcode locations, and they've also made reference to comparable schools elsewhere in Maidstone that have similar locational characteristics. So as far as the Highway Authority is concerned, the forecasts are evidence-based and they do form a robust basis for assessment. I think perhaps just turning to the broader context, I mean, clearly this is a school in a residential area, and with that comes travel demand, with that comes traffic movements, pick-up and drop-off parking arrangements, and that causes inconvenience and delay to local residents and road users. When we assess the application, we clearly have to be very mindful of the MPPF and how that states that proposals should only be resisted in situations where the residual impact is severe. And with that in mind, we have to take account of the fact that periods where there is going to be traffic and parking disruption are within short periods at the beginning and end of the school day. Now, in the morning, the behaviour tends to be more transient as parents drop off their children at different times. But in the afternoon, there is more of a congregation as parents gather to collect their children at the end of the school day. But the important point there is that that afternoon congregation doesn't coincide with the commuter peak on the highway network. So we've had to be mindful of that when assessing the proposals, and we've also had to be mindful of the fact that since the school opened, the crash records indicate that there is no history of crash incidents in the vicinity of the school on Gatland Lane. So I think, bearing in mind all of that, the County Council has had to conclude that there simply are no highway grounds on which to sustain an objection to this proposal. Thank you, Chairman.
In a moment, Mr Bailey wants to add something.
I think it's just a couple of points that I wanted to raise. Just adding to what the Highways officers raised there. I mean, in the reports 234 onwards from your report, there is quite a detailed assessment of what came through on the Fant Farm appeal decision. Now, the reason that's been set out is because the inspector at the Fant Farm appeal took into account this school at full capacity. He took into account the Fant Farm development and the generation that was created by that, and found that the road network was perfectly capable of accommodating the needs at full capacity. So I would advise members to take into account what is set out on pages 234 right down to 237 of your committee report, because it sets out exactly what the planning inspector said in that report, and that is very significant to how you consider the issues on highway safety tonight. Could I also, if the chairman doesn't mind, go into the issue that I think needs to be set out? My colleague will deal with the issue on the conditions. I think I need to very clearly set out about the play space issues, because that's obviously a very key consideration. Now, obviously, in terms of where the play space, the report does set out, I don't propose to repeat what the report says. It effectively derives its guidance from the Advice on Standards for School Premises, which is published by the Department for Education. Now, this document says that advice is a non-statutory document and has been produced to help recipients understand their obligations and duties. With regard to open space, it then defers back to, in terms of the outdoor space, and then takes you into Building Design 103, which is quoted in the report. Now, what that guideline says is, again, it says it's non-statutory area guidelines for mainstream cool buildings. And what it does, it says, however, in line with policies which seek to increase choice and opportunities in state funding education, these guidance will not necessarily have to be met in every case and should always be applied flexibly in light of the particular circumstances. So what I need, I'm just asking members to look at, is these guidelines that are said, they are guidelines, they're non-statutory, they're recommended, and particularly the government says they should be adopted flexibly or interpreted flexibly in terms of the various implications around the school. I don't really want to go into the issues in the policy statement because I think that's set out in the report. What members will need to be very assured of is that the MPPF says great weight to the need to create, expand or alter schools, paragraph 72. I know Councillor Daly referred to paragraph 77. What members are considering tonight is an expansion of the school, and the MPPF is very clear that it says great weight needs to be given to the need to expand schools. You've got in front of you an urgent update report which sets out the need, and on that basis, members, when you're making your decision tonight, you have to apply the great weight to the need. And then obviously I'll let you carry on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think Councillor Borton, I'm sure you want to come back on some of that.
Yeah, I do. I'll start with Kent Highways because I think this shows what this committee has had time after time again about this massive gap between reality and what Kent Highways say, to be totally blunt with you. I mean, with the greatest respect, Brenda, you didn't actually address any of the junctions that I spoke about in any detail. It's very clear to anyone who's ever been along Gatland Lane that it is not fit to be home to a school of 420 pupils. And frankly, I think the whole highway network in Maidstone and across Kent is in a mess. I think now we know exactly who is responsible for that. It's the Kent County Council Highways Department, to be honest. And sadly, here we are, people in Fants, victims of that yet again. And it's about time that KCC Highways sourced themselves out, to be frank. So I'm not even going to address the issues any further because I see no point, because we're never going to come to an agreement on it. However, on open spaces, I hear what Mr Bailey's just said, and the key word he said was that these guidelines need to be adapted flexibly. Now, I go back again to 8.22, particularly the second one there about the on-site provision of 197 square metres against the requirements in the in what you pointed out, of 1,030 square metres. Well, you can be as flexible as you want. I mean, that's a massive gaping gap, to be honest. And we're nowhere near, being anywhere near these guidance whatsoever. So I'd quite like to move, Mr. Chairman, right now, that we refuse this application on that particular ground there.
Right, thank you. Before we proceed any further, is that proposal seconded at this point? Councillor Round, do you wish to speak now, or do you wish to reserve your right? Thank you very much. Councillor Harwood, you are next.
Thank you, Chairman. I understand the strength of feeling from local residents, and I applaud the advocacy of the local ward councillors on behalf of their residents and their concerns. The problem for the rest of us is that we are members of a regulatory committee which is bound by policy. We cannot grandstand, we cannot make decisions on a whim. We have to ground any decision we make in policy. The big problem we face is that government, the current government, its pet project is free schools, and they are being promoted very, very strongly. The local government policy statement on planning for schools development in 2011 states a refusal of any application for a state-funded school or the imposition of conditions will have to be clearly justified by the local planning authority. Given the strong policy support for improving state education, the Secretary of State will be minded to consider such a refusal or imposition of conditions to be unreasonable conduct unless it is supported by clear and cogent evidence. The problem we are faced by is that the key issues that are being raised are around the open space issue, where we know that won't stand up, and on the highways issue, where Maidstone Borough Council, whether we like it or not, is not the Highway Authority. The Kent County Council are, and they are making no objection. But there are other issues at stake here. This committee, members of this committee, have permitted an unprecedented trajectory of housing growth in West Maidstone and South Maidstone and North Maidstone. Never at any time in the development of Maidstone have so many houses been built in such a short time, even after the Second World War and before the Second World War, when a lot of the big council estates went up. When that previous growth went for it was well-planned growth. It included schools, it included parks, it included open spaces. We have a very free market approach to housing now, where essentially landowners put in speculative applications for housing, and they get it because this government's policy supports that housing going ahead. And the problem is, people in these thousands and thousands of houses springing up, try and get along Hermitage Lane, try and get anywhere around Fant, try and get up the A20, have got to go to school. And the problem we're facing is that we're now getting applications for schools on remote greenfield sites, which would never get permission for housing, but they're pushing these sites for schools. I mean, in North Maidstone, in my area, I've currently got three applications, one extant application, 2 applications about to come in, on remote countryside sites. So if we don't put the schools in the areas where people are living, such as Gatlin Lane, they will go in the countryside, and that will generate more car trips, it will generate more pollution and all the problems that we've got. So I think that we're in a very difficult situation here. I think that the policy situation is tough, and I think that the alternatives are perhaps even less palatable than the reality of placing schools actually in sustainable locations where at least some people can walk to them. And I think we've got a big issue here. I would much rather that we try and get some control over this site. That I don't think the conditions go far enough. I mean, for example, I think the conditions on landscaping are not up to the job. I think the issues around open space aren't up to the job. I think that the Gatlin Lane frontage really needs sorting out. I mean, in terms of getting it looking like a decent planting and not an institutional use that it currently does, which is not good for the children and it's not good for the residents. There is no, I mean, even though there's on the plans it shows renewable energy, there's no condition on renewable energy, and a school is an incredibly energy hungry type of development. The problem is, if we refuse tonight and it goes through as it will on appeal, we will lose the ability to influence this scheme and to knock the rougher edges off. And if I could make a decision without the planning policy framework, I would do it. The problem is we've got the framework we're working within, and we can make the residents happy for 3 or 4 months, but they're going to have to live with the consequences. I would rather that we work with, I think we probably need a deferral, or we need potentially to have a local member group set up to try and look at some of the issues of the detail policies, of the detail conditions attached to this, but actually get something that the residents can live with. Because we're on hiding to nothing. I mean, the inspector's decision on Famp Farm, I think this is the final nail in the coffin in relation to the transportation issue, because he addressed it because it was a current application. So, as much as it goes against the grain, I would like to move an amendment to the motion that we grant, that we refuse, that we approve, but that in relation to the landscaping issue and in relation to renewable energy, that we attach relevant conditions to that, and we have a local group with the ward councillors and perhaps the Grope spokespersons who work together to ensure that they are of a high quality. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Tony, can I just ask, there are so many issues that you've raised. Do you really think an approval is the right way? Shouldn't it just be a straight deferral?
What I don't want is an appeal for non-determination. That is my concern, and that's what we're faced with. I think the moment we mess about with this, we will get a non-determination and we will end up getting nothing. I will listen to the officers' professional view on this, but I think you understand the sentiments of what I'm trying to achieve.
Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chairman. When I was looking at this proposal, the thing that strikes me is that if this site was the right site, then there may be ways you can push it this way, push it that way, and come up with some conditions. We're really faced with a site that's inappropriate for this size school. That's what it really comes down to. There's a wing and a prayer that's been put together to kind of try to make it work, but it's almost like saying KCC have got these needs, and this is what KCC needs for education. Does that mean that if I was to put my house forward for a school site and I bound it together with a few neighbours, would that all of a sudden make that suitable? I'm worried about safeguarding. Yes, there are parents across Maidstone that are looking for school spaces, but if I have a child at primary school, if I was looking, and in the mix was a school that used an open space which is publicly accessible, it would concern me, especially in these times. My child's school is locked down during the day, and even just to walk to the church for carol services, it's unbelievable the number of volunteers and teachers they get together just to move this small group of children from one place to the other. So that's going to impact how many teachers. Let's say, for instance, there's sports day. How many? Well, sports day may not even be the issue. It may be just one class going there to play football. Do you just have one teacher on that field? Are they looking at all of the guys that are participating? I'm concerned about the fact that we've got agreements with an adjacent school that could go away. I mean, schools around here have been known to put forward plans for 220 houses on their playing fields. So what happens when that goes away and we're left with what we've decided tonight? I'm very concerned about this site, and I'm very concerned that this isn't quite what it seems. It isn't something which is there in place, 100% ready for this school, and will be so going forwards. I feel there are things that are involved to make this happen that are slightly outside of the full control of the school.
Just slightly. Councillor Cox, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've got 4 things to really point at. I don't want to repeat completely because Councillor Borton did bring them up, but I do think because we've been told to be flexible, I really do need to know the amount of flexibility before one breaks. Because we're always told, you've got to be flexible, you've got to weigh it up. But we need to have criteria to know how flexible to be and how much the weight should go one way before we say no. And until we have quantified units of that's it, no more, I don't see how I can be flexible because I'm not being told what to guide it against. Point 1. We've been told that they're going to use the adjacent playing fields. We have, as has been pointed out, been told that Oakwood Park needs to be fenced off because of the safety of older children. All it's going to take is one dog of any breed who sees a ball and a child going to get it, it makes a beeline for it and maims that child. I do not want to be the person who passes this and said it was all right to use that park and that playing field. It is an open space. It may be used by that school. The letter that was been given to us as Appendix 1 was dated 2014. I now understand it was from a different headmaster. Why are we wasting the paper and showing us that? That is not an agreement. It actually says this is not an agreement and is not binding. The school that we're looking at as Bower Grove is about 5 times the amount of space than this one does, yet its roll is around 220. It has 20 parking spaces for its 220 pupils. Teachers, this has 37. We've said its need here for local schools. That means the ability to walk to school would be rather nice. Yet when I've been at this school between 8 o'clock in the morning and 10 to 9 when they've all gone in, I've seen taxis from about 25 miles away. I would like to know, we've been told that the transport plan gave a breakdown of all the different postcodes that went to this school. Why weren't we shown the breakdown? We might have been able to judge whether this was a local need or a need for a school to come in and drag people from a lot further away that are going to need car journeys to get to this school. I really don't see what we're doing. I've made my point about the severity and the flexibility. I can't be flexible in this because I haven't been shown what to compare it to. I really do hope that we can defer this and some proper information can be given to us. And why can't we actually, as a borough, say to national government, hold on, you're telling us the MPPF is correct. Well, I'm afraid down here in Maidstone, on this one occasion, it may not be. Why can't we say, no, we need to look at this, you need to send someone down. I don't want it to go to an inspector's because I understand what Councillor Harwood is saying. But I do not want to be responsible for passing something where a child's going to get knocked over and then we'll be told, yes, there is a reason not to have a school there, because it'll be too late.
Yes, Councillor Prendergast, please.
I'm seeking some clarification, please, on this previously unseen urgent update. It says, further information has been provided by KCC Education on other schools and needs. And there's a sentence that says, it is imperative that Jubilee becomes the 2-form entry school that was always intended. And then the guidelines, which they've also attached, says the Jubilee Primary School was proposed to open as a 2-form entry, 60 pupils per year group within the Maidstone North Planning Group, serving Vintners Park and surrounding areas. However, in September 2014, Jubilee School was established in Gatlin Lane, Maidstone West Planning Group of Schools. So the 2-form entry was never planned for Gatlin Road, or that is at least my understanding of it. So some clarification on that would be good because, you know, that the whole point of is based on, you know, the whole point of expansion is based on clarification of that. I know that primary school places are under severe pressure. There are always going to be blips, but we are expanding here in Maidstone. And in fact, I'm aware that there's been a 5% fall in demand for primary school places this academic year, 2016. I know that's set to increase next, that will rise again next year and the following year. But it's quite interesting because I spent some time Googling after I spoke to our legal officer late this afternoon. And I know that Jubilee Primary actually has 9 vacancies currently, which is 30% of its intake. So that's, in terms of need, that's quite a big figure. But again, that could just be a blip, and I would like, more information on that. I absolutely support what Councillor Clark has said. As a parent, I would be horrified to send my children into a public open space at the age of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I also agree with you, Councillor Cox, that an agreement with the adjacent school is absolutely meaningless, not worth the paper that it's written on. I also think we need to see more stats from highways on this transport assessment. I'd like to see it because I don't feel I can make a decision on this application without it. So I would really like to see this deferred to the next cycle. Thank you.
Just to draw members' attention that the motion that was moved by Councillor Borton did not refer to the highway issue, and we are not currently debating that at this point because that was not the motion that was moved. Councillor Mumford.
I did really come here with an open mind. I thought we was going to be talking about the transport. And we have got the highways saying what they're saying, and that's always difficult for us. I agree with Councillor Harwood. We are a regulated authority, and we have got to sit here and look at the policies. I would like to hear the answer about non-determination from the officers, because my vote at the moment, I would like the conditions, like Councillor Harwood, really looked at. I don't think they're appropriate for this. I know I'm going to be the only person speaking on this, but you're talking about a public open space and school children using it. There are, I don't know if it's many, I know of one, and if you go to my parish, you will find they've got no open space, and they march the children across the road, supervise the children in the recreation ground, across a zebra crossing I will be talking about later. But that is acceptable. It's been acceptable all my lifetime. They do not book it, they use it, and they are supervised. That is telling you that situation. I would like to hear about non-determination and whether we can defer this and get the ward members and we sit down and we look at those conditions and bring it back to this committee. I'm not in favour of approving it as it is.
I think whether there is an issue of urgency here, Mr. Bailey.
Yes, I've been liaising with the applicants, the EFA, on this application, and I think it highly probable that there could be an appeal for non-determination. If members were to defer this item, I would suggest that it's deferred only for one cycle, and the fact that it's reported back to the next planning committee, and the results of whatever members agree tonight, and I think it needs to be very specific in terms of what you're asking us to look at, needs to be deferred. Now, I can't speak for the applicant. I think if there was the probability of it coming back in one cycle, i.e. in 3 weeks' time, with some updates on additional conditions, with some additional information that members may request, then I think that would potentially reduce the likelihood of an appeal for non-determination. But I will add on that, I mean, in the guidance it does say that the Secretary of State will give serious consideration to calling it in himself for determination if there is an appeal for an appeal on a site for a school. So not only is there a risk, and it's difficult to quantify where that risk is. It's way outside its time frame. The applicant was very pleased it came to this planning committee I can't guarantee what would happen after. You reduce your risk if you put a 3-week time limit on it for coming back to planning committee. And I would suggest if that's the course of action tonight, it must come back to the next committee.
Are we talking about both applications or just the one?
With regard to the issues, I mean, obviously the second application is dependent on the outcome of the first application. They're mutually dependent. So likewise, if you approve this application, then obviously the need for the condition doesn't suffice, doesn't stand anymore. If the application is refused, there is still a need for the condition. So it's mutually dependent, so both applications should be heard. You know, you couldn't hear one now, you couldn't hear the second one, so if you deferred this item, you must defer the next item. But again, as I said, there's a risk that it could go for non-determination.
Councillor Harwood, I think I need to bring you back now if you have a view on this particular issue.
Right. I therefore frame my my motion to state that I move that we defer this application for one cycle of the Planning Committee to allow planning officers, the applicants, the ward councillors and planning spokespersons to discuss the detail of the conditions attached to the scheme. And in terms of what the conditions have got to talk about, we have got to, because, I mean, just to underpin this, we can have gentlemen's agreements, we can have agreements in meetings, we can have letters. Conditions do the job because we can have enforcement against them. So we need, through conditions, to ensure that the open space outside green space play area issue is bottomed out. We need a proper agreement, you know, with the surrounding uses. We need to really understand what this means, not just some, oh, they might use a bit of Gatlin Park, they might use the school. We need to bottom out by condition what they can use and when they can use it. We need to detail on the landscaping. We need to revisit the landscaping to improve enclosure of the school, including the Gatlin Lane frontage. We need to understand the detail of the renewable energy generation for the scheme, and we need to understand the lighting, security lighting and other lighting issues accruing from this proposal. And we also need to understand the detail and upgrade the ecological enhancements, which are talked about in the report, but are fairly vague within the condition. I don't know if the ward councillor has got anything else to add, but they're the ones I'd noted.
Councillor Borton, no, ward member first.
No, sorry.
I would point out to committee members who won't have been as closely involved as myself and Councillors Harper and Atkinson. Actually, the reason for the delay in this coming here is purely down to the planning department at Maidstone Borough Council and its inability to do anything since before Christmas on it until a few weeks ago. So I think that's an important point to make, actually. I don't want to see, under any circumstances, any appeal for non-determination, and I actually personally think that this needs more than a cycle, because there are so many issues here to resolve. Not the ones that Councillor Harwood have raised will potentially change the whole nature and shape of the application, and getting it done in a few working days is, I don't think, achievable. That's going to reach a satisfactory outcome. For residents here. I mean, we're looking actually at 2 weeks, basically, before the next agenda is published for the next planning committee. And what will end up is with a bit of a dog's dinner, I suspect, because we won't have had the opportunity to look in detail at at all the issues that are arising. So that's why I'm absolutely adamant that we've got to look towards refusal now, because I think deferral actually takes power away from us as well.
I haven't spoken on this application yet, except I would say that it is almost never unwise unless you expect an immediate appeal for non-determination, which we might. But it's almost never unwise to take the opportunity to try and defer to see whether or not issues can be resolved. They may not be, in which case we will be back here in 3 weeks' time, and you can then have, members of the committee can then do whatever they decide to do. But in my experience, which is not always right, but it is certainly lengthy, it is usually the right thing to attempt to defer and try and see if issues can be resolved. Councillor Cox, and then I'm going to ask Councillor Round if he wants to come back, and then we are going to have to wrap this up. A point of clarification I will take now, if that's what it is.
The point of clarification is there's obviously guidance on when non-determination will be called, and I'm not convinced that we know exactly when that is. I know that you're recommending it be one cycle, but I wonder if you could go into more detail as to when that actual time would be.
I'm not going to bring the officer in on that, because that's like asking how long is a piece of string. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. I think one thing that I would like to add, if he would be interested, to Councillor Harwood's reasons for deferral and to be picked up, are some points that were raised by the previous councillors Atkinson and Daly about the previous conditions that we were looking at last time about transport plans and methods by which the children were going to be given an off-site place where they could be dropped off and then be escorted back to the school. I don't know. But at the moment, people walk at least 400 yards, crossing between cars, and I think it needs to be looked at, please. Could that be added to one of the reasons? Have they fulfilled the recommendations at the previous lower amount that they had last time?
It isn't really appropriate, I'm sorry, to actually look at whether or not people have met conditions that have already been imposed. It may be appropriate to look at whether or not those conditions need toughening, which is another aspect which we might take on board. But actually looking at whether you've met a condition or not really isn't quite appropriate. But looking at whether it's the right condition is another question. Yeah. Yeah, so I will want to wrap this up now. And are there any other further points for consideration? No, right. We know what they are. Councillor Round, did you wish to come back? Okay, thank you. Right, we have a proposal. We need to check. We've got all the reasons for deferral here. Have you, bear with me a moment while I check this. Yes, please.
What I have is to defer the application for one cycle to allow the officer, the applicant, the ward members and the spokespersons to discuss conditions relating to open space and to bottom out and get a proper agreement as to where the kids are going to, the landscaping, enclosure of the school and Gatlin Lane frontage, renewables, lighting, security issues and ecological enhancements. And then I've got the one from Councillor Cox, which was to make the highways conditions tougher.
To review them to see whether they're appropriate, I think is the wording that we are using. We shouldn't prejudge the outcome. Councillor Bolton.
Two additional things. Could we have that ward members so that all three of us are involved? And could we perhaps also add the parking issues in the residential roads surrounding it to that list as well?
Right. Parking issues, if they come up, is something within the council's own control and should be being looked at separately as a matter of a traffic regulation order on street if there is a parking issue, because it is not a planning process, but it is something we might wish to take on board outside in another forum, because the council would be able to address that if appropriate for a traffic regulation order in cooperation with KCC.
Okay, so it's just the original 5 reasons then. It's not the Councillor Cox's or Councillor Borton's.
We can't mix the two applications in an a la carte manner, tempting though it might be. Right, all those in... Sorry? Yeah, well, I'm seconding it. Oh, no, Although, to be fair, I'm not sure. Did Mr Mumford second it? I did need to check that. Did you second the deferral, didn't you? Yes, he did. Yes, thank you. Right, those in favour of deferral for one cycle to clarify those issues. Those against? Is there an abstentions? One. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to that. Right, the substantive motion is obviously that becomes the substantive motion. All those in favour of the substantive as it is now presented, which is to defer for one cycle for those reasons as set out previously. Nine. Those against? Yeah, there's been one change there. And abstentions? 2 this time. Thank you. Right, obviously the second item on the agenda relating to Jubilee School is also deferred. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen of the public, but we do have to make sure that we've gone through all the belts and braces one way or the other. No, it's automatically deferred. Councillor Clark.
Chairman, can I propose that we, perhaps the officers from the planning group, take back an action to review how the conditions that were originally imposed on the original application, how they are conforming, how the applicant is conforming, because I think that would be useful for this committee.
Provided you make sure that that's a second resolution which has no bearing whatsoever to the original.
It's absolutely the case. If anyone is willing to second me.
And in fact, actually, I think it would be better if you just asked rather than made it a resolution. But can I just take a consensus? Members do want to check that the conditions on the existing application are being complied with, don't we? But I would rather we did not make that a formal motion at this point because of confusing different issues. Indeed it is, but we will not go into that now. Thank you, members. Right, I will give members of the public who wish to leave, having been here for those 2 items, an opportunity to do so before carrying on. If anyone needs to go for a comfort break, this will be a good moment. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would be resuming your seats, and that means councillors who are maybe outside, or we'll proceed without you. Right, I'm going to start in a minute, and any councillor who isn't in the room will not be able to take part in this item. Right. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're recommencing the meeting. Moving on to another very contentious subject, item 22, page 216, 1 to 17, the Broadway Maidstone.
Thank you, Chair. I'll introduce the report briefly as possible. The application is for an extension of hours for an existing drive-through McDonald's restaurant to allow 24-hour operation. The report summarises the relevant issues, and I will briefly go through it. But first of all, the application site is outlined in red on the site location plan in front of you. It is within the urban area of Maidstone, and we have existing adjoining residential properties which are referred to in the report, Broadway Heights to the north. This is the rear of the car park of the McDonald's restaurant, and the residential properties are shown in the subsequent slides. The listed buildings shown there in the centre of the picture in white. These are mentioned in the site description on page 216 of the application, 19 to 21, the Broadway, Grade 2 listed buildings, and Broadway Heights, as the photographs take you round, is shown in these subsequent shots. So, in a nutshell, the major concerns and objections, and we have had subsequent to the report a petition from local residents, 101 signatures, raising objections to the proposal on the grounds of its potential impact on their living conditions. The issue is effect on residential amenity, and the report goes into some detail exploring that issue. Section 7 deals with it in detail, and the committee will note in section 7.04 the Environmental Protection Team disagreed with the original assessment of impact, noise impact assessment. Subsequent details were submitted, and in 7.06 the Environmental Protection Team were satisfied that their technical concerns were addressed, and that the proposed operation is likely to represent a low observable effect level of impact. But I think it's fair to say that the report indicates that there is the opportunity for a negative impact on residential amenity, and that is highlighted within 7.07 of the report. A number of control measures are outlined within 7.08 of the report. And I think, without going through those in detail, and I'm sure members will have questions on those aspects, it is the conclusion of officers that while there is a concern over amenity, and it's accepted that there may well be sporadic incidents relating to the youth as presidents. We cannot control and prevent all incidents before they happen, and the Environmental Protection Team have not recommended refuse of the application, but are suggesting a limited approval for 24-hour operation for a 6-month period, so that the impact of that use can be properly assessed before any further 24-hour use is approved. I'll pause there, but just to say the application is therefore being recommended for approval on a 6-month basis, subject to conditions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chapman. We move to the public speaking section of the meeting. Mr. Kirby, objector, please come forward, and you have 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to address you regarding this application. As a resident of Broadway Heights, I and many others, as evinced by the petition that has been presented to the committee, already suffer a loss of amenity by the presence of McDonald's and its 18 hours a day opening. The noise, smell and litter that the restaurant generates is unpleasant to have to live with. Extending the operating hours to 24/7 will exacerbate this already disagreeable problem. Noise issues from the site take several forms. Loud music from cars, revving engines, shouting, etc. are very frequent. If I or others contact McDonald's staff by telephone, callers are told that there is a non-intervention policy. That is, if the staff answer the telephone. Most times it remains unanswered. Extension of the site's operating hours will aggravate an already unpleasant situation. McDonald's proposed solution is to make CCTV recordings available to the council or police. This is a clear case of McDonald's sidestepping their responsibility and expecting others to do their job for them, whilst I and others must suffer the loss of what little peace and quiet we have left. Smells permeate the block where I live, and when the restaurant is operating, necessitating either closing the windows or suffering the smells. During the summer months, as today, this makes for difficult choices: be too hot or suffer an olfactory assault. All day and every day we must endure the odour of cooking meat, and during the breakfast period we are further subjected to the smell of burning pancake batter, unpleasant to say the least. By allowing this application, what small respite we get during the night time will be lost. Litter has increased greatly since the opening of the restaurant, and despite claims that frequent litter patrols pick up discarded cartons, wrappers, cups, etc., I personally have witnessed discarded bags and drink containers bearing the McDonald's brand uncollected for over 48 hours in the West Station approach. And indeed, as early as Monday this week, I observed some outside our own entranceway that were there for 24 hours. Although this is probably the least of the problems we face, it will not improve if 24-hour operation is approved. When permission for the restaurant was granted following application earlier, Condition 7 of that permission restricted the hours of operation in order, and I quote, to safeguard the enjoyment of properties by adjoining residential occupiers. I ask you to bear this in mind when considering this application, as the effect it will have on the quality of life and general amenity of myself and of others will be dramatic. In fine, I ask you to consider this. How would your quality of life be affected if you had a 24-hour drive-through built and operating next to where you live? Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely request that you reject this application. Thank you, Chair.
It is tempting for members of the public and councillors to be moved to strong emotions when there are important, and this is an important issue, up for consideration. But I would ask members and members of the public to refrain from supporting either side of an argument. It isn't appropriate to planning committee. Mr. El-Haji for the applicant, please.
My name is Ali Al-Haj. I'm the franchisee of McDonald's down the road. I've been in Maidstone for the past 5 years, and I actively work 6.5 days a week looking after these stores, getting involved in the local community and making sure that we are a very valid member of the community and we contribute positively to everything we do. The application seeking planning permission for the restaurant and drive-through to operate 24 hours a day. As members know, the application is recommended for approval for a 6-month temporary period only to ensure that the impacts can be monitored. The application has included a noise impact assessment. The results of this assessment provide clear technical evidence that noise impact for the extension will not have the potential causing anything more than low risk of observable effect and no mitigations is required. It followed that the proposed extension of operating hours will not be detrimental to the amenity afforded to the local residents. The assessment is supported by the local environmental health officer who has confirmed they are unable to argue with the technical evidence of the assessment that shows overall impact of the proposed operation is likely to be low. In addition, the technical evidence within the assessment will have submitted a premises noise management plan which we will carry out on a daily basis, making sure that there is no impact to the residents. These are to ensure the proposed extension does not trigger any unacceptable impact. All other consultees, including the police, the community safety, and the environmental health, do not object to the proposal and actually confirmed that they have not received any complaints in relation to McDonald's. The proposed extension will create additional 30 employment positions in the store, raising the employment in the store to 185 employees and over 300 employees in the Maidstone area. This will help reduce unemployment and increase the earnings of disposable income and benefit other businesses. I thank you very much for listening to us, and I hope that you will pass the recommendation of the temporary license. Thank you.
Councillor Harper, please.
As Ward Councillor for Fan, again I'd like the committee to reject this application. People accept now that McDonald's is there within its current opening hours, but we don't want to see these extended for the sake of the residents' peace of mind, quality of life, mental and physical health. The proposed extension to 24 hours fails to meet the test of sustainability, which is the main criteria as planners you have to use, which is economic, social and environmental. It fails the social environmental criteria as follows. There are insufficient containment measures to present this operation being a bad neighbour, especially to the residents of Broadway Heights. The environmental impacts are not considered include the extra pollution and impact on air quality and also the smell from the fryers. When the site is open, there is insufficient flues on the site and the smell of the fat percolates all the way through Broadway Heights. Extending the opening hours, as we heard, will only aggravate an already identified situation leading to residents suffering mental and physical health issues. Speak to the Broadway Heights residents. Half of them can't open their windows, otherwise the smell of the fat from the fryers just goes all the way through all their clothes and their flats. It's just not acceptable. Staff blowing whistles all night will keep people awake and there'll be the increase in litter. The revised noise assessment is fundamentally flawed. The McDonald's plant would be open 24 hours a day without being turned off, unlike now when the site isn't open the whole time. McDonald's does not block out all the road noise from the Broadway Heights and Tunbridge Road and Hart Street, as is suggested. It has no blockage effect on traffic noise to the flats at all. There's been no assessment of the impact of noise except at ground level. As you've seen the photographs, if you live in Broadway Heights, you're above the flats, and therefore any noise assessment surely should be done at that relevant level. Ground level is absolutely pointless if you live in the 5th or 6th floor of a block of flats. Most customers after 10 o'clock are expected to come by car, and that's likely to lead to loud noise from radios, revving and running engines and antisocial behaviour. The total inadequacy of the noise mitigation plan is just utterly unproactive. If the council officers are clearly concerned on the long-term impact, as they are only recommending a 6-month temporary permission, this means that we're wanting to use the residents of Broadway Heights as guinea pigs for 6 months, which is really unacceptable. However, if, as a committee, you are minded to approve this, I would ask that any trial period be reduced from 6 months to a maximum of no more than 6 weeks to minimise the impact. Thank you.
Councillor Atkinson, please.
Thank you, Chairman, members. First of all, I find it absolutely astonishing that a drive-through restaurant in a residential area was even considered for planning permission, let alone actually granted planning permission. Anywhere you go throughout the world, such drive-throughs tend to be on industrial estates or in remote locations. Even the one at the other end of Hermitage Lane is at least in a commercial area. Having visited the flats overlooking the site on a number of occasions and witnessed the noise, chaos and smells already emanating from this restaurant from residents' balconies, I find it even more astonishing that there is now a proposal to subject the residents to these problems 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As the report says in para 7.01, the current hours of operation were restricted at the request of the applicant himself in order to safeguard the enjoyment of properties by adjoining residential occupiers. This was effectively confirmed by the officers by condition 7 of the permission granted by 14/504694. Surely nothing has changed and these considerations still apply. Like Councillor Harper, I'm not convinced that the noise assessment impact has taken full account of every location affected. For example, as far as I can tell, no one has actually taken any measurements from any of the balconies at Broadway Heights. Not only is there the vehicle noise, but at particularly busy times, there is an employee in a high-vis jacket blowing a whistle whilst pretending to be a traffic cop. I've heard this myself and found it quite disturbing. It must be even worse for the people living there, many of whom have mobility issues so cannot escape as readily as you and I. I'd question whether there is any demonstrable need for this extension. At the times of night proposed, anyone desperate enough for a burger or McFlurry only needs to drive the 6 minutes or so it takes to get to the drive-through at the end of Hermitage Lane. There is therefore no need for this extension at this location. However, if members are minded to grant this temporary permission, I would say that the proposed 6 months is way too long. If this permission is put into effect straight away, the residents will be made into guinea pigs for the entire summer. As far as I'm concerned, it only takes 6 hours to realise that noise and smell levels will be excessive. Having said that, I've spoken to residents who would accept a trial period of 6 weeks maximum. I would, however, request that members refuse this application on the grounds of loss of amenity to local residents. Thank you.
Despite the fact the timer was working, you're exactly on time. Well done. Councillor Daly.
Chairman, we come to another situation which has been brought about by a variety of things that have happened in this chamber in the past. I seem to remember when that area in the corner of Barker Road was quiet. We had showrooms there that sold motor cars. And when they went, they had to be replaced by something, of course. And there were all sorts of things I suspect that they could have been supplanted by. but another burger bar or another food outlet was chosen and was given permission by this committee. The residents which are now in that area also have been brought in by decisions made in this committee. Office blocks have been turned into residential apartments, and various other things have crept up and built up around these various other amenities, as so-called. I think the words residential amenity appear various times in your paper. As far as I'm concerned, an amenity indicates a benefit or something that's desirable. I don't think that what we're talking about tonight is necessarily desirable, certainly not at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. But people do matter. And I know people have to be fed. I know people have to be watered. But people also have to be nurtured. And my view is that nurturing people includes their daily rest. And I think that people are entitled to their daily rest, probably between the hours of midnight and 6 in the morning. And to have something of this nature, banging on, with doors banging and people's having radios on, and that even if the drivers are not inebriated, the people that they're carrying around probably at that time have had a good night out, probably on a Friday or Saturday night. How are you going to control the noise? Send somebody out from the burger bar and say, please keep quiet? Oh, yes, I can see that happening. I'm afraid I wouldn't want to be there, and I wouldn't want to have to put up with this. And I don't think that people who have looked at this from an environmental point of view have actually looked at it from the point of view of the people who are the residents. You've had over 100 people saying they wanted to object to this. I don't know that you've had 1,000 people saying they need burgers at 4 o'clock in the morning. So can we please have today, at least, even if you're going to have burgers somewhere, let's have no fudge.
A fudge burger would be an interesting approach. I'm not sure how it would work. Right, there is a very short urgent update on your papers. I hope members have taken the opportunity to look at it. If not, please do so. Can I now take declarations of lobbying? I've been lobbied. Most of us. Councillors Hemsley, Stockall, Spooner and Vizard appear not to have been. Everyone else has. Right. Councillor Bolton, you once again, as the third ward member, kick us off.
Yes, it's busy nights for us in our part of the world tonight. Of course, what we're not talking about here is the principle of McDonald's being on this particular location. That's accepted, that's happened, that's in the past. I'm sure, hey, look, I can think of a million things that would have been better there than McDonald's, but it is where it is, and we're not going to move it now, to be honest. And whatever we think about it, it's popular, and there's a demand, and we only have to look at the traffic coming out of Hart Street and Barker Street to see that people use it, and it's clearly a thriving business, and Ali's clearly doing a good job in the hours he's allowed to open so far. And to draw a parallel with the last application, where I think I said that Jubilee School weren't the best neighbour, well, McDonald's have proven themselves to actually to care about the community. The partnership that we've done with the bins, for example, to help with the list situation about a year ago now, that's been helpful. Yes, it might not go far enough, but it's been helpful nonetheless. And I've always found Ali to be someone, as a ward councillor and as a local businessman, to be somebody who's willing to listen and willing to take on the concerns. That doesn't mean that we're always going to be able to reach full agreements and everything, because our priorities are different, for example. What we're really talking about here is obviously between the hours of midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning. And as someone who has, over the last few years, been in Maidstone Town Centre between midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning, and been out of pubs and clubs at this particular time, and I'm sure you have too, Mr. Chairman, over your years as well. Normally you end the nights with a burger or a kebab, to be honest. I certainly do. And there's certainly no... I'm not declaring an interest as well, just one. Oh, there you go. But no, normally you go to one of the establishments in the area on your way home. It's a serious point, actually, here, because we do have a thriving nightlife in Maidstone. We have people, a lot of people come here. A lot of people spend a lot of money at night as well, in and around the town. We actually hear some people outside as well. There is a point here, which is that actually we need the best place to sober up. Frankly, is often inside rather than outside on the streets. And one could argue that were McDonald's to be open between midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning, it would give those clubbers the opportunity to do so, that perhaps they wouldn't have already. And this is a point that's been raised from where I can see whenever this sort of proposal comes forward, because that is what we're really talking about. No one's going to get in their car at 3 o'clock in the morning and think, let's go, I'm going to go and drive to McDonald's and have a drive-through. No one's really going to do that. It won't increase traffic on the A20 or the A26 going up away from town just because it's open. So it's a really tricky one, actually, because I absolutely see where the applicant's coming from, and clearly I see the issues with residential amenity here as well. But I think that a temporary permission is perhaps the best way that we can find a resolution to the problem, just so that we can establish, because there have not been, as is mentioned in the reports, a huge amount of complaints about this. So I think 6 months might be a little bit too long, but I think some sort of temporary permission might be the best way forward, and then we'll have more evidence to establish whether 24 hours would be appropriate at this location or not. There's actually very little evidence, because it's never happened in Maidstone Town Centre before, to establish whether this is the right move, and that's why I can see why the officers have proposed this temporary permission at the moment. So I'll be interested to see what other members of the committee say, but I can see where the officers are coming from on this.
Interesting. Perhaps we should be employing you as a restaurant critic. Councillor Harwood. Thank you, Chairman.
That was interesting listening to. When I go home from Maidstone, I vote to go home with more than a burger. So it's more interesting. But anyway, meanwhile, back at the ranch, I mean, genuinely, when it comes to kind of supersizing the hours at McDonald's, I am hating it, really, I think, to paraphrase it. I feel very protective towards Broadway Heights. As you know, a number of us there were very long planning process to where we got where, and I think in the end we created a really good urban living environment, and I think they're excellent flats, very high quality, and just the kind of residential apartments we should be delivering, not the rabbit hutch that we too often have. And when Broadway Heights was first built, it was a good living environment. Ever since the drive-through McDonald's has been driven, there have been problems. And I think that any councillor who has not been to the drive-through when it's in operation and experienced the environmental impact really should in the near future. It's a row of cars with their engines ticking over and a fug of fumes over it, where it hurts the back of your throat. And that is not just on Saturday nights or Sunday evenings. This is every evening. This is round the clock. And the cars do not turn their engines off. They chug away. I feel sorry for the poor staff in the cubicle, in the window, who are serving, because you've just got this fug of fumes, because there is a canyon effect. I would like to see our environmental health put some NOx tubes down there to understand actually what the air pollution implications are within that canyon area at the back of the scheme. But I move on from the point that it is not just that we're going to get those traffic fumes, no respite, so that when people want to, when they're in bed, when they're lying down, when lung function is at its least efficient, we're going to be putting more fumes being sucked into those properties and going in their windows. And I think it's really important, because it is static traffic chugging away. There is also the noise that's been talked about, which the ward council has talked about, which you really need to understand. You need to go down there of an evening to understand what the impacts are. And the other issue is everybody knows there's a strand line of McDonald's litter. You can get a certain distance before you've finished your drink and you chuck it out the window. The strand line to the west of this McDonald's is my house. And if I have to pick the McDonald's wrappers out, the whole set, you find, you know, the drink and the cartons and everything. And a number of sites I litter pick round the town, it was when this site, not the town centre sites, it was when this site became live, that litter level went up because it is a very kind of transient eating on the move approach, and it goes through the electric window disposal chute. And we are going to see an increase in that. So my view is that on residential amenity and on environmental impact in terms of fumes and in terms of noise, that it is unacceptable. If we were having this discussion about a chip shop or another takeaway in a parade of houses, we would not entertain giving it round-the-clock opening hours. All of us in our wards, in our villages, in our parts of the suburbs, in our town centre, have had these debates about fast food and takeaways. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of the residents of Broadway Heights, not just Broadway Heights, of the listed building, of the Georgian listed building next door, and of the people who live a little bit up the road. I'm not declaring an interest. I think this is a step too far, and I think that we should refuse this application on residential amenity and on sustainability.
Could I ask you to be just a little more specific, Tony, as to the actual detail, particular loss of residential?
Yeah, the residential amenity arises from traffic fumes, noise and cooking smells from that being extended in their period of impact to a time when people expect to be able to sleep in peace. And it's the proximity to residential apartments to this takeaway, and I think it's exacerbated by the drive-through effect. It is the drive-through that creates so much traffic pollution, so much clunking and noise.
Right, I think I've got that. No, before I do, is that seconded? Councillor Cox, do you wish to speak now?
Thank you very much. I do see both sides of the coin here, but I will be supporting, as I'm seconding, Mr. Councillor Harwood's motion. I would just like to question one thing. If we're getting complaints from the residents who are there, the McDonald's is there, we're not going to change that. I would like to be asking why, because in this day and age, there are filtration units that will take the smells almost completely away. And I would have thought that, I know they are asking their customers to not rev your engines. There are signs that are up there. They are making every effort. And I would say that if a lot of the things are addressed, and if there could be ways of deflecting the sounds, why are whistles being used for the staff? They're not sheepdogs. I think some things, perhaps this could come back in a year's time and we look at it again if they've mitigated stuff, if they've paid attention to what the residents are saying and they've become a better business, or more better. So that's not right. Yeah, I know, I retract that. I do think we should look at this more, particularly the filtration on the extractor fans within there. There are better ways of doing that, and I'm pretty sure you can eliminate all these smells. So I will be seconding Tony.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to ask Mr. Bailey to come back briefly.
Yeah, just coming back to members with regard to fumes and smells. Obviously, whilst obviously the policy in terms of R17 relates to impact on amenity, fumes and smells, obviously that is not something that's actually regulated by planning. That's dealt with by a separate team in terms of environmental health. So if there were to be an issue from their extraction systems, it is not something that planning would look into. It would be the environmental health team who control and regulate those systems and inspect them. So what I would say to members, if they are looking at that, is keep the noise and smells issues outside of that out of the potential grounds and just keep to the issues on the impact on amenity from regard to noise, revving engines and the other things that Councillor Harwood mentioned.
Right. I am going to move rapidly forward on this now. It's Councillor Round, then Councillor Mumford, and then I am going to try and move towards a conclusion. I did see you as well, Mr. Clark. And then we will move to a...
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I'll try and make it quite simple, to be perfectly honest. One of the issues is obviously, if we did grant this, what will we assess? In other words, what is the impact, what will the impact be, and how will we monitor it? I think there's some answers required to that sort of question. How will we assess? How will we measure the impact? How will we monitor it?
I think it's an appropriate point to ask Mr. Chapman, who is nodding vigorously, to try and respond to it.
Yes, the report and subsequent discussions I've had with the Environmental Protection team indicate that they would respond in terms of complaints and would monitor the 24-hour use should it be approved in that way. So they can't be proactive in the sense of set up monitoring processes or instruments as a matter of course, but there are processes already set up for members of the public and others to make complaints, and there are processes for how those are monitored and dealt with under the environmental protection legislation that Mr. Bailey referred to earlier.
Does that answer your question, Mel? Right. Mr. Mumford, please.
Yes, I'm not going to speak about what I do at 3 o'clock in the morning, buying burgers and all of that. What I'm talking about is this committee. This committee spends hours discussing conditions, and we make sure they're right. The planners make sure that they pass the 3 tests. We put a condition in to protect the amenity of the local residents. Nothing's changed. I don't know why the application is in front of us again, because we must have spent a long time discussing this condition. So let's get on with it.
Thank you. Very succinct. Councillor Clark, you get, and I will let you come back, Mr. Bolton, but Councillor Clark.
I just wanted to, there's the notion that was mentioned earlier about pedestrian customers coming here and the lack of car movements, but I think that this would actually create an area for cars to congregate in the town. And I'm thinking back to sort of 20 years or so when people used to sort of wheel spin up and down the high street. And general sort of low-level antisocial behaviour. And I particularly remember a fast food restaurant in West London where it was generally sort of a run-of-the-mill drive-through throughout the evening, even sort of a pub turning out time. And it was in the early hours, if you were taking the night bus back, that you would see this sort of almost an area for people to congregate and sort of rev their engines and that sort of thing. And I just think that's something that we also should consider for the residents, because I think it would attract people like a magnet.
I have to say that it's quite amusing in some ways that you should say that, Councillor Clark. I mean, I think there are issues with this, but I think one should note that before, when this was a car sales room with a car park outside it, the major nighttime events there, and I did observe this every night when I went to work on the night shift at Royal Mail, was that the car park, which is now McDonald's car park, was full of boy racers who were playing their radio at extremely loud volumes, and it was that sort of annoying bass, you know, which everyone hates, apart from the people who play it, and then racing up and down Hart Street. And actually, interestingly enough, Environmental Health proactively set up monitoring on that one, as they did with Atomic's warehouse, which we may have spent some time in our youth in. So I'm not convinced that you can't do proactive monitoring, but it will be academic if we go the way the committee is looking to go, because you can't monitor something you haven't approved. I would say that just because this site had a previous history doesn't necessarily mean that McDonald's should be allowed to continue that history. Because what has changed in this area is that when it had its previous antisocial behaviour, there weren't many people living there, so it didn't really matter that much. Whereas now there are lots of people living there. So the circumstances have changed and have changed dramatically. And as we all know, with the deferred item that we have on the agenda at 3 Tunbridge Road, new housing is going to be going in not far away. So we're adding extra residents whose amenity may or may not be affected by this. I think it's fairly clear there is an issue. It could well be resolvable. I think, like Councillor Cox, that it is possible to come forward with an application that does address these issues and allows McDonald's to do this. I don't think this is that application. And we are not in that position. I would like to err at this point on the side of caution and residential amenity. I'm not saying that is going to be, that's it forever, but I think at this stage, with this app, you can only judge the applications you get in front of us. And I think at this point, we have to say it's a step too far and side with the residential amenity. Councillor Bolton, you now get the chance to tell me how completely you disagree with me.
No, I don't necessarily disagree. I agree with your answer to Councillor Cox's point, by the way. Clark's point, sorry. But I was specifically going to mention the issues that Mr Bailey gave in answer to Councillor Harwood's reasons for refusal, taking away, obviously, the policy issue, R17. That leaves us with just a traffic issue here. And I think if you're looking at this from an independent perspective, how many extra traffic movements are going to be generated at McDonald's between these extra 6 hours opening? Because I don't think it will be that many, to be honest. Hold on. No, but in terms of it, in terms of the 820...
I'm sorry, Mr Bolton may or may not be making popular remarks, but he has to have the opportunity to make them.
But specifically in terms of additional traffic up the Tunbridge Road, basically here. So what I'm trying to do here is ensure that the reasons that are given are as tight as possible, actually. I just wonder whether the officers would recommend that we add anything further to that to make that slightly tighter, bearing in mind the answer Mr Bailey gave to Councillor Harwood.
Let's see what Councillor Harwood says first, because he had indicated again, and it may well be that he can shed some light on that.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, the grounds for refusal related to the traffic fumes and noise arising from, essentially, there's a horseshoe of roads behind the site, and the cars crawl along there with their engines running, and there's shouting and music and everything else that occurs there. So it is that element, and it is the element of, clearly, it's a drive-through. There's an open hatch through which the food is passed, and so I think it's very difficult to seal the unit in terms of smells. But something I was very struck by when I read the environmental health advice from Maidstone Borough Council was how there was very little evidence in relation to the air pollution issue. And I wonder whether we should put an informative or something through that nitrogen dioxide tubes should be placed into this area, because I have a real concern that we've got a canyon where effectively cars crawl through it all the time, chugging away, producing it, and that is the worst. That's when engines are least efficient, and when diesel does not burn properly, especially. And we cannot say there is no problem without any evidence. And I think we need to, perhaps if we can add that to the amenity grounds for refusal, an informative that we actually get some empirical evidence, I think it will help our case. But essentially, I agree absolutely with Mr Bailey that it's an amenity impact, and the amenity impact is the cars, the people in the cars, and the extension of hours will exacerbate those problems at a time when it's only reasonable that the surrounding residents should try and get some sleep for 6 hours or whatever.
Right, okay, members, I'm going to try and tie this up between the two officers here and see if we've got something.
I think I've got something in terms of, by virtue of the noise and disturbance arising from the use of the site for 24-hour operations, from the comings and goings of customers, cars visiting the site, radios, etc., the proposals would be harmful to the residential amenities of the surrounding occupiers, contrary to policy R17 of the adopted local plan and policy DM1 of the emerging local plan. Sorry, DM1IV. Four.
Roman numeral 4.
Of the emerging local plan. Is that?
People just don't have a classical education anymore.
Well, I've just put by 24-hour operations from the comings and goings of customers, which covers all kind of avenues, and cars visiting the site and resultant noise from car radios, and I've just put etc. on the end of that, because there could be a limit. You know, there could be all sorts of issues.
I'm going to put that forward because I think that it's best to go with the ground that we are reasonably sure of, rather than adding in curlicues and other things which just make it more difficult, unless you really insist on something else, Councillor Harwood.
Right, it's working. Yeah, I just for clarification, well, the most, to my mind, the most obtrusive impact is the FUG, the fumes, because of the type of use. Are we addressing strongly enough this issue around the exhaust fumes, which are lying over the site?
I'm having a little trouble establishing in my own mind, let alone anyone else's mind, why that should be more of an issue between 12 o'clock at midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning than it is between midday and 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
I would say it's intrusive the entire time because of the pollution, but it's close to residential apartments and bedrooms where people are having to breathe, and those fumes are there. Whereas if it were not open, there would not be cars chugging away underneath their windows, and there would not be any fumes.
That's true 24 hours a day. The only difference is that more people sleep at night than during the day. So are you arguing that because I would say that is going to add a level of difficulty to this decision that we probably don't need. It may well be that the council separately should try and seek some evidence for that, but that is not necessarily something we do within this.
Okay, in that, well, yeah, I mean, I think it's attracting vehicle movements with all of the impacts that come with vehicles, from the noise, fumes, everything. However, on your second point, I do think that we need an informative attached to this, that the environmental health investigate installing nitrogen dioxide monitoring equipment in proximity to the drive-through to get an understanding of air pollution issues in that area.
I'm sorry, I'm taking that as a second resolution, not as an informative. I'm going to move to a vote on the motion as proposed without that. I'm not saying we don't do it, Tony. I'm just saying we don't do it like this. So can we have a vote? Can we have a vote on the right? That this essentially, to Tracy, it has been proposed and seconded and put forward that we refuse this application to vary the condition on the grounds of the effect of residential amenity of the vehicle movements and the effect those vehicle movements have. Tracy, do you want the full reference?
The proposed development, by virtue of the noise and disturbance arising from the use of the site for 24-hour operations, from the comings and goings of customers, cars visiting the site, the issues with cars, radios, etc. would be harmful to the residential amenity of nearby occupants, contrary to policy R17 of the adopted Maidstone local plan and policy DM14 of the emerging local plan.
Thank you, that's very clear. All those in favour, please indicate. And that's everyone. That's everyone. It's obviously no against or abstentions. Right, that decision is made. I'm now going to ask the members to, on a second resolution, to ask the Environmental Health Department to investigate placing NOx measurement devices in proximity to the site. All those in favour? Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Cox. All those in favour? That's everyone. Thank you very much. That is passed. Right, at this point, I am now going to take a 15-minute recess for our coffee break. I wasn't going to put that thing in. It was complicating matters too much.
Cheers. It's a guilt. I hope those guys sitting there are going to come and give evidence. These guys here. Is that your evidence base? I don't know.
No, I think in terms of, I think in terms of what you've got, whilst I think, the inspector will look and say, well, how did that was what the officer but I think, there is a, yes, no one has said this is but in terms of policy, if you're looking at policy, you're going to have issues that, there's lots of residential flats in close proximity. Had they come forward with a scheme, then I think there's a case to, there'll be more of a reduced case to argue. They've come to 7 days a week.